Right then, let's go.
I am delighted to introduce another episode of 2 on 1, the Powerchair Football Podcast. I am again joined by Mr. Ryan Sipple, my co-host, and our now permanent guest host, Mr. Dean Williams. It's great to have you both here. How are you, gents?
Very good, Alex. Excited to be back doing this again.
So am I. Looking forward to this episode. I think this episode will be a great interest for young players and also coaches up and down the country throughout our clubs and leagues as we get to grips with the FA talent pathway. We are delighted to be joined by Mr. Rob Seale and Adam McEvoy. Rob works at the FA and Adam is, of course, our development manager for the WFA, but so works very closely on the pathway. I won't do too much of an intro on them because I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. So first up, Rob, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Really delighted to be on this podcast. Like as I said before, I've heard a few of the previous episodes, and you're doing a fantastic job, guys, in raising the awareness and shouting from the rooftops the great work that's going on across all Powerchair football. So I'll try and be as brief as I can. I spent 17 years at 𝐏𝐨𝐰𝐞𝐫𝐿 Foundation. I worked with boys and girls of all abilities, worked across different player pathways, development centres, had a chance to work in the academy, in their recruitment, and I was an academy scout. That opened up doors to educate colleagues around my real passion, which is para football. And by far the most rewarding I found at my time there was working with players with disabilities. And for the majority of the time I was there, I headed up the disability football department, and we really grew it and expanded and took on various different projects. And we hosted back in the day it was Centre of Excellence, but talent hubs and regional emerging talent programs for para footballers. And alongside my work at 𝐏𝐶, I started taking on some consultancy work with the FA. I was a coach, a mentor, a tutor, so delivering coaching disabled footballers workshops. I had a chance to also then sort of go into being a talent selection scout in para football. Had a chance to work with the B1 development squad a few years back as well. And I did coach on the RETP, the core RETP as we call it, for players who are deaf, partially sighted and have cerebral palsy.
Lovely stuff. And that brings us up to where you are now, I suppose. That's
right, yeah. So in between and alongside these roles, I also managed to qualify as a teacher. I'm not quite sure how I found the time, but that's a real passion of mine. So I'm now currently the development. Let me get my job title right. Sorry to make a mistake first off, guys. Yeah, so talent development and education lead. Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, so I'm now the talent development and education lead at the FA. And
how could you forget such a catchy job title, Rob?
It just slips off the tongue, doesn't it? So it's talent development and education lead in the para football team at the FA, and hence why the kind of teacher experience helps in my role now, where I'm looking after talent hubs and the regional emerging talent program, which I'm sure we're going to speak quite a lot about. So we've got this core RETP, which is, as I said before, for players who are blind, they're partially sighted, deaf, and players with cerebral palsy, and also that responsibility to support the growth and development of the Powerchair RETP.
Lovely. Now that brings us neatly in, I think, to Adam McEvoy's involvement in this process. The majority of listeners, I think, will know Adam and will probably know he's heavily involved in Powerchair football. They might not know the specifics of your role, but rather than go over all of that, let's go into how you fit into the emerging talent program for Powerchair football.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So in the context of my role within this particular element, I've worked with Rob and obviously previously with Will Perkins on establishing the pathway. So back in 2019, it was the beginnings of the program itself, starting off with obviously the regional emerging talent pathway, and just working at setting it up is what it would look like across the 3 regions. So initially it was just 2 regions, so a north and south, and thankfully that's grown over the last couple of years to 3 regions. And I'm on hand to support Rob with bits of coordination from our end, and then also to support when it comes to some of the coaching provision, supporting the coaches that lead on the regional program, and then also around identifying some of the players that we're looking at trying to progress through the program as well.
Excellent. So we've now got a good introduction, I hope, to both of your roles and how that fits in, and we've got the phrase emerging talent program, regional emerging talent program, etc. So I guess the next question will be, can we explain those? However, I think Ryan wants to jump in with a...
No, absolutely that. I was just wanted to clarify for anyone tuning in that if we go to RETP and use the abbreviation, that is for the Regional Emergent Talent Programme. Just Rob, from your point of view, it would be good to understand from an FA perspective what the RETP is and its ultimate objectives, both within the core programme and the Powerchair specific ones.
Yeah, so the Regional Emerging Talent Programme, or RETP as you say, is very much a checkpoint for players. It allows us to monitor their developmental progress and their performance standards. We only really see players 3 to 4 times a year, so it as I say, it's a snapshot of how they're getting on. We obviously keep tabs on their development back at their clubs. This is across both the core and the Powerchair RETPs, but it's a chance really for players to showcase their talents, how they're progressing according to their age and their stage, because everyone's at a different point in their football journey. And yeah, I think it's just an early step on the para football pathway, and it should be an environment where players feel really supported but challenged to the right levels to help them progress and ultimately transition through the pathway. The next step being the National Emerging Talent Programme, which we've had some recent success at players moving through to that level.
Perfect. And just for those that don't know, and whilst Powerchair football is unique, certainly when compared to the other impairments, as kind of a base framework, the RETP is age specific. So is it 12 to 18, I think?
That's right, Ryan. Yeah, there is a bit of flexibility on that, and it's something myself and Adam are still sort of grappling with in terms of making sure that it's the right environment for players. But that's roughly the age we expect players to be at the RETP in terms of Powerchair. Yeah.
No, that's great, because I think thinking about the RETP, certainly current participants, I think our youngest player, certainly when they entered the programme, were 9 or 10. So there's that on the bottom end of that scale. We kind of said if players are competing in regional or national league football, then they absolutely are old enough to access the opportunities through the FA's RETP. And likewise, there's others that have come into Powerchair football later than others. So we have players upwards of 20, 21, 22 within the programme as well, because the nature of Powerchair football and the disabilities that we cater towards, it isn't. Some of them are age. Some of them deteriorate over age. So being able to provide opportunities for people and players accessing the sport later than you typically would, maybe in other environments.
And I also think, to add to that as well, obviously we all know that we had a pretty large period of time away from the game due to COVID. So some of those players that had initially entered the program in 2019 in their mid-teens then lost a good 18-20 months of football. So taking that into consideration, it's given us a little bit of flexibility to give them more opportunity, really, to be within the program and to continue to give us and their coaches the ability to show what they've been working on, certainly in the last 12-18 months since we've come back to really full activity.
So the England, the RETP, or the England pathway as a whole, RETP, would you say, Rob, is kind of the base level, certainly within Powerchair football? For those that don't know, the RETP is the bottom of 4 steps currently, and then it's the National Emergent Talent Programme, which we can talk on in a little bit more detail. Then that progresses to the recently introduced England Development Team, and then the England Senior Team. So is that kind of how you view it? It's the entry point for young, talented, aspiring players who want to represent their countries, hopefully one day.
That's exactly right, Ryan. And when you sort of frame it in that way, there's not many steps, are there, to sort of from that first taste of the pathway up to senior level. And we've got some fantastic staff and really experienced, knowledgeable coaches on the program that are there to help support players through and guide them, support them to make sure that we really allowing them to realise their full potential.
Something that I absolutely love about the England pathway, and I think you can probably speak in a bit more detail, but from our perspective, the England pathway for Powerchair football is so comprehensive. At any one time you can have upwards of 55, 65 players within that FA ladder to become England internationals. Adam's already alluded to the fact that the RETP is now split across 3 regions. We deliver one in the south, in the Midlands and the north, so all 3 of them squads are comprised of 10 players. So 30 players at any one time just in the RETP, and that's then obviously as you go up to the National Emergent Talent Programme, England Development and England Senior, it affords so many opportunities to players. And whilst it doesn't sound like a lot of steps, the opportunities are there because we've got a smaller pool of participants maybe when compared to more mainstream forms of talent pathway.
I'm going to interject for a minute here because I feel it's remiss not to thank Rob and the FA for the work that they're doing, because I'm sitting there from a perspective of just about, you knew I'd talk about this, just about to launch our medium-term strategy from a WFA perspective, and one of the key words on that, something I'm suggesting we would call one of our core foundations, is the word of opportunity. And you started off, Rob, by talking about showcasing talent, and then we've suddenly gone into language there around opportunity. That is such an important part of what our strategy should be. And without you guys having something that has the eloquence that what you currently have in play, that of course changes the nature of the opportunity that we're affording people and those that are interested in potentially going on to represent their country. So I love that, but it is a personal, from a chair perspective, it's a personal thank you for the work that you put into that, and of course that opportunity you're giving our athletes as well. Thank you for that.
Well, thanks for your kind words, Dean. It's such a privilege, first and foremost, to be involved in this world, and it's an absolute passion of mine to make sure that we are giving players of all backgrounds a chance to progress and realise their dreams. If they dream of playing for England one day, well, we're here to help support them. And the setup that the WFA have in terms of all the players playing in the national leagues and that setup is quite extraordinary as well. So in terms of, you mentioned where players in other formats of the game may well be hiding in mainstream football, it's incredible to have opportunities, as you say, for players to play in our really fantastic national league.
I think it would be really beneficial to talk in more detail about the nomination and selection process. So firstly, for you, Rob, I'd love to understand what talent identification looks like. So what players can focus on, what they can do. I'd love to hear more about the FA's 6 key capabilities in the wider core programs that the FA deliver, and then from Adam's point of view, how they are relevant to Powerchair football, and maybe provide some examples.
Absolutely. So I think it's important to mention that para is very much mentioned at the FA in the same breath as men's and women's, and alongside all of those squads that come under men's, women's and para, we're all really committed to making sure we're developing more skillful players, that we're providing more inspirational opportunities, and that we're offering support through our transformational workforce, as I mentioned before, some really fantastic individuals who are there to help players along their journey. In terms of the nomination and selection process, it should be an accolade for a club to say they've got a player, or they've supported a player into the para pathway. And there are some clubs out there that maybe are not aware of the level that is required. We'll always say that we'd welcome any nomination, and we always want a club or coaches at clubs to come and see what the RETP is all about, and understanding if it's right for one of their young players in their club. We'll always say as well that it's all about players' personal growth. So if a player's not ready for the RETP at the time they might come along for a taster, we will always say that it's a case of they're not ready yet. We'll always provide feedback on their strengths and development areas, and that we will again always welcome a player back and monitor that their development. We call it a bit of a revolving door in our pathway, and that door is never closed for a player.
That's great. And focusing on the FA's 6 key capabilities, we've discussed it many times at the various RETPs that we deliver, and it's something that you reference fairly prominently. And just before we started recording, I spoke about the FA's old 4 corner model, which comprised technical, psychological, physical and social. From your point of view, has it transitioned now from that 4 corner model to the 6 key capabilities? And if you can talk about them capabilities.
Absolutely. So while we realise that in a coaching session, we want to affect a player in those 4 corners, as you rightly mentioned, we also then, on top of that, and it's quite a new initiative from the FA, again, as I mentioned, across all the formats of the game, we are looking at those 6 key capabilities, which are scanning, timing, movement, positioning, deception, and technique. So it's fantastic that we're able to share these capabilities with our RETP players, and to sort of educate them around what the terms actually mean. When we're giving feedback to them, it's quite clear and concise in what we're asking them to think about when you've got those 6 headings there. And interestingly for me, in the Powerchair game, scanning for one player may well look very different to scanning for another player. Again, we always talk about chair positioning as well on the court. So these are all quite new but exciting ways and terms to use when working with these players. And in amongst all this, we know that talented players in the Powerchair game need to have excellent communication. We need to see leadership, and in a lot of ways, it's the real characters that are the ones that progress and develop through to the next stage.
Then I'll pass it over to Adam and Alex. Being such influential members within the RETP and beyond, how you kind of use them 6 key capabilities to guide your coaching sessions and assess players' quality?
Yeah, thanks, Roy. I think in terms of those 6 key capabilities, certainly from my point of view, to be able to support the program and in turn support the coaches working within it, it was to give a little bit of definition and understanding as to how it linked to Powerchair football. So I'll just touch on each of them and give a couple of examples just to emphasize that. So for positioning, it would be around a player's chair control and their chair preparation, so making sure that, as Rob touched on, around which way they're facing and the angles of their chair to be able to help them make a decision and execute what it is that they want to do. For movement, obviously that's around their driving ability and understanding, and what I mean by that is obviously how well that they can drive and can control a chair, but also understanding when potentially that it might be better for them to be playing in reverse, or when it might be better for them to be playing going forwards. So that's an example for that. From a technique point of view, that's how our players strike the ball and the variety of ways to strike a ball and the execution for that. And then that links really nicely to the timing around the direction of when and where to pass as well. And then I really like deception and scanning as two of the final capabilities. I love deception because for me that's around indicating to execute one action and quickly change to another. So it might be that you're looking to spin into the ball, and then you may all of a sudden change and you do a 360 spin and completely change the angle of the pass. And then finally for scanning, for me that's around always being our game is so fast, and it's around understanding the positions of your teammates, the positions of the opponents, understanding where your teammates might go or where the opposition might go as well, and around those movements and patterns. So those are how we try to link it to the 6 key capabilities. But also we're conscious that the players that certainly at the RETP level, they won't necessarily be able to execute all of them, but they may demonstrate multiple abilities within 3-4 of those capabilities, and then for us and for the coaches to really try and work on those and also the other areas where they may not be as proficient just yet.
I'm just for a brief moment thinking about my those 6 capabilities, and when I first got in a Powerchair, how I would have scored. I'm not sure that's something I want to know the answer to at all. Thank goodness for that. You'll be looking for far better quality than I was able to demonstrate. I just want to go back to a word that you mentioned, Rob, actually, because I think this might be quite useful, and I'd be fascinated by how you and Adam would read into the word that you've used. So you use the word character. We're looking for character that's out there. If I asked you to give a definition to what you believe to be the right character, the things that you look for, what would you say?
Excellent question. I think, someone who is eventually going to represent their country in the Powerchair squad has to have many aspects of their character, really. I think it's important to have a leader, and what I was looking for there was to say someone who's going to lead by example, someone who you can really trust and count on in high pressure situations, somebody who's really able to take that pressure and perform to the highest level when it really counts.
I think that provides a perfect time to talk about that communication piece and that social piece. And I'm going to come to Adam for this. We try and reiterate over and over again the importance of communication and the social skills within the RETP. After this, I'm going to go over to Alex, because Alex, being the current coach of the South Regional Emergent Talent Programme, constructs his coaching sessions to have a strong focus on social skills and communication. Ad, can you just talk about the importance of social skills and communication, and why they're so important for this program at the very base level going forward.
Yeah, I think for us, and even with my own coach's hat on, working with players and observing players at this level, it's to try and see almost the foundations and the shoots of players that have some of those elements. So are they happy to answer questions, and when things are posed to them by a coach or by their teammates, they're willing to give an opinion, or on their court when they're actually playing, is there some form of communication? Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be verbal. It could be non-verbal. It could be with the eyes. It could be through pointing. Anything that we can pick up on, as if to say that as a player, they're thinking about either what it is that they want to do or where they want to receive the ball, and almost like they're playing a game of chess, and they're trying to think about what that next movement or next action is. That's then demonstrating not only that social side of the way that they're trying to communicate with those around them, but also that psychological side as well, around their understanding of what it is that they want to do, for the next step, and then for us trying to build on it from there. So it's not always definitely that it has to be a really loud verbal communicator, but it's just got to be someone that's able to showcase that they are, willing to communicate with their peers, and go from there.
So then over to Alex, because you are have a strong focus on the social element of Powerchair football, and just would like for you to talk about how you create your sessions to facilitate them sort of interactions.
So, full disclosure, I do coach on the RETP in the South, and so I get to spend some time with Adam and Rob in the programme, so I know it quite well as hosting alongside Ryan and Dean today. But I do therefore have some insight into what happens in the sessions, and why I construct, as you say, my sessions quite a lot around communication. I'll take a step up to the top level, and then we'll come back down as to why we do it. So when you watch international football or Powerchair football, it's at most it's a really European and world is every 2 years. So there's been a great deal of growth between when England last played a competitive game of Powerchair football to when they played their first game at the World Cup. And by a lot of growth, I mean other countries have developed their tactics, they developed their strategies, players have developed how they're going to. So England are coming up against new challenges. They have new opponents to play against. They have new tactical setups to play against. They all have extremely good capabilities when it comes to those 6 core capabilities we talk about: scanning, timing, movement, positioning, deception, and techniques. How you apply those as a team is at its core. We need to solve the problem of beating this team. You can't solve that problem if you don't communicate and agree how you're going to do it. You'll need to change tactics mid-tournament. You might need to change them mid-game. You might need to be able to recognise what's happening in front of you on a pitch and why you aren't getting success, or why you are getting success. And so being able to communicate and understand what you're doing as a team is fundamental to being an international footballer. You have more surprises as an international team than you do as a National League team, because at National League you see them every single year, you see them 10 times a year. So you there's regular information you got against your opponents. That isn't the case when it comes to international football necessarily. So we need to be able to have footballers that can problem solve. They can analyse what's going on in front of them as a pitch, and they also understand as a group what strategies and techniques they can implement to overcome that. That comes back down to being able to have players that can communicate with each other about those strategies, about the problems they can see and how they can solve them. So my sessions often include a lot of changing scenarios within gameplay. So we might introduce some unusual rules. We might introduce some unbalanced teams to play against. There'll be a variety of circumstances that present them with a challenge they wouldn't normally come up against in a game. That isn't necessarily means that what the challenges are going to come up in the future. What it is doing though is creating players or giving players an environment where they have to think about how can we best succeed here. Then we talk about that. Then we implement strategies, and we use the skills and the 6 core capabilities that we've got to overcome them as best we can. So that's predominantly why my sessions are focused around that communication and that problem solving as a group. Is it gives players some tactical insight without sitting through a PowerPoint. So that's what I would say ultimately is we're using, or my sessions are designed to increase communication by giving them problems to solve that requires it. And that is a development for a player as they go along the pathway.
No, I can absolutely vouch to that. Some of the weird and wacky things that you pull out to deliver your sessions, whether that's a 3x3 grid on the wall where people have to play noughts and crosses, where typical goals through the goalposts aren't the way to give your team an advantage. It's constantly changing, constantly evolving, which requires players firstly to process that internally and then relay that information to their other teammates, and it is fantastic. And attending all 3 sessions alongside Adam, when I say sessions I mean the South, Midlands and North, it gives me such a fantastic insight into the different levels of coaching, the different techniques and strategies adopted by our various coaches, and that brings me on to requirements for coaches on the RETP. I'm going to pass it over to Adam to begin with, because I think from a Powerchair point of view you can talk about what is required from the WFA and the FA for people and coaches to be considered for the programme, and what they can do in the future to be considered.
Yeah, so I think the key thing to initially emphasise is that this is the beginnings of a performance programme for the players. So by that, it's also the requirement for us to have performance-based coaches as well to deliver. And by that I mean, having that preparation in place beforehand and not off-the-cuff coaching as some coaches may do. Although I hasten to add that, you may see something as a coach mid-session which steers you in a slightly different direction. But for me, that comes as a result of being prepared in the first place and knowing what it is that you are delivering and what you're looking for. And if something's not quite right, you might be then able to interject, and it might take you down a slightly different route as well. But that's part of that being a performance coach, and that having that preparation and knowledge in your mind about what it is that you're trying to achieve within your sessions. And then for me, it's around having reflective coaches as well, both in regards to not only reflecting about the players after your sessions and building an understanding about what their strengths are and what their areas for development are, but also around that self-reflection too, around what you deliver and what went well, what would be even better, what you might look to do next time. Because for me, putting that all into the mixing and the pot, it means that coaches have that idea around what it is that we're looking for, and working with Rob, just some of the key things that we want to establish, which it sits really with the core program as well, around having a high percentage of ball rolling time. So players are doing a lot of work within the time that they're there. Coaches have got to be aware around the players that they're working with, so having an understanding of the different types of impairment and how that might affect the players as well, and taking that into consideration, but also then utilising that to be able to maximise the ability of the player. So if you've got a player that maybe can't turn their head to look over their shoulder, as a coach, my focus would be, if they can't then turn, then we need to make them absolutely top class at moving in reverse and building a picture and being able to see everything whilst going backwards. Linking into things like that around being really positive as a coach throughout, lots of engagement with the players, challenging their knowledge, asking them questions, using a whiteboard, and creating a challenging environment, but also a supportive environment. So some of the phraseology that's used by some of the other coaches across the core program is around being comfortably uncomfortable. So being in an environment where, you might not be able to do something straight away, but you're going to work towards it, and you've got your coaches to be able to support you to achieve those goals. And then finally, the same as the players as well, having that effort and attitude and being positive around being on the program and wanting to help our players reach the next level of their development.
That whole simulating what I would call problems and events. I mean, I would, if I'm not talking about my passion of wheelchair and Powerchair football, the reality is the business world that I'm in, simulating problems and events is a great way of testing people's mettle. And I think that goes back to the point we were talking about in terms of character. So to your point, Al, if you're simulating those environments, what could happen against a certain different nation, a different team, what would you do if those kind of scenarios? That really does make sure that we heighten people's decision-making skills. So I've written down here as you were talking, guys, decision-making under pressure is the key bit, because you can actually learn to make decisions and have processes to deal with that. The biggest thing for me is simulating events that actually throws people deliberately, puts them under that pressure and sees what they've got around that. I'm really encouraged to hear there are lots of people that are putting a lot of time and effort into planning how you go about simulating those kind of environments. So I think that's a really, really good thing I've just heard there.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. We also then offer some coaching opportunity, or it offers coaching opportunities as well for us to impart a bit of knowledge and offer solutions and offer suggestions within that. So a team might be presented with a rule mid-game where they can't put an extra defender in the box. So all of a sudden they've got to defend differently. But the converse of that means that they can also attack differently. So then there's seeing threats as also as opportunities. And so it's about developing players that understand what that implication is for us and the opposition as well. And we do that often with quite a tight time limit, and we give them quite a tight time limit to discuss and make decisions and do that. Then we reflect afterwards. Did you make the right decision in that time? What were the key things you needed to look at?
Love that. I'm going to end with coining a phrase there, which is, the more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in battle. And I think that's a lovely sentiment for people to think about listening to this podcast as well. So if that preparation that goes into it, and you throw yourself into those things from a playing perspective, then it's going to pay off. Nothing is neutral. Those kind of things will pay off.
The other thing I would say, I think or hope that if you ask most players in the South, I'm not saying that it's not the case elsewhere, but I can't speak for it, most of them would say that the sessions are also quite a lot of fun and quite enjoyable as well. So there's that's also in there at that level. It's not coming in high pressure to perform and you get told off if you don't. There should be a lot of fun involved in that process as well, which I'm sure Rob, with his teaching background, will tell you is a good environment to learn in as well.
Absolutely, Alex, and I'll back up Dean's words there. The fact that you empower these young players to problem solve and give them loads of opportunities to fail, which is very much a part of the learning process, is really going to help strengthen their development across their skills and the psychological side of performing under pressure, like you say. But yeah, absolutely agree with you. They're always enjoyable, your sessions. I just want to make one final point about the coaching side of it and the communication. I think it's something that you do and the coaches on the program do really well, is inviting that feedback from the players throughout a training session, throughout match situations as well, to make sure that they're getting a real say and they have some ownership over the direction of the training session as well. And that again gives a platform for players to verbalise how they're feeling and how the session is going. And Adam mentioned rightly that a good coach will always self-evaluate and seek feedback from everyone else involved in the session.
just to provide some clarity, more to Adam, what is the current process for clubs nominating players? So if a club has a promising young player, what is the process of making them known to the FA?
Yeah, so this is something that Rob and I, and Rob can touch on this as well, around that process of trying to make it as easy and as straightforward as possible. So it's effectively a club-based process where they can put forward a player or players that they feel would be suitable to move into the programme. But as part of that, they have to detail and explain some of the key attributes that they feel that the player has, which links to the 6 key capabilities. So they give a little bit of an overview as to what they feel that the player is competent at, and then that process comes through to Rob, and we will then discuss the players, and normally it's a case of inviting them to their local region and coming along just to see how they are in that environment. And that's something that we've done quite recently with some of the players that have come into the programme for the first time. And so that would give them a bit of an overview, and then from there, if we and the coaches, and Al's a good example of this, that they feel that they're suitable to be in the environment, then they'll be welcomed into the programme to come and participate on a regular basis. But then likewise, we have had players that maybe it's not their time just yet, and they've gone away with feedback as to why that is, and what we feel that they need to work on to then potentially come back into the programme in maybe 12, 18, 24 months time, dependent on things there. So it's always a case of, it's not a never, it's just a not now, and then we'll always keep that door open for players to come back through. So with that, and obviously now this podcast, hopefully clubs will have a stronger understanding as to what that requirement is in that process. And certainly from going forward for next season onwards, we look forward to having more players to be able to assess and look at, and hopefully come into the programme.
So Rob's obviously already mentioned the fact that we gather 3 or 4 times a year. So each region, certainly at RETP level within Powerchair football, will gather together for one day where they'll be assessed, and they will be kind of reviewed whilst referencing them 6 key capabilities. Rob, because it was recently introduced, and I know it's the potential for one coming up, you oversee a kind of a nationwide regional emergent talent program day at St George's Park, where we typically take the top performers within the RETP and assess their suitability to potentially progress, or if it's an age-based consideration for them to drop out. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Absolutely, yeah. I just wanted to add one point onto Adam's discussion around the nomination process. Firstly, though, I think it's important for coaches at clubs to understand the level required to be in the regional emerging talent program. So, of course, we'd always welcome a coach down to observe and come and see the players in action, just so they've got a real understanding of the sort of level of player we're looking for the regional emerging talent program. But yeah, certainly the event at St George's Park, we're not sure if we're calling it like an RETP festival of sorts, but still a work in progress at the moment. But yeah, essentially we're looking to invite the top players across the 3 regions to come together to again see how they get on with a player from a different region. So whilst we might have a really good idea and understanding of how well a player is performing in the north, we may not have seen them on the same court in the same environment as someone in the south. So last year was the very first time we did this, and it was a great success. We're thinking about how we can expand and develop that for this year. But yeah, of course, we'd like to do something similar again, in the hope that Will Perkins and the rest of his team across the NETP can see the current crop of RETP players and assess them and see who would be suitable for to make the next step up.
So we've spoken about the RETP, we've discussed the NETP being the next level up. I think it was only last year we saw the formation of the England development team, which sits just under the England senior team. Adam, can you talk about the introduction of that and how that fits into this kind of the wider pathway?
Yeah, so the development team was effectively introduced to bridge the gap, really. And by that I mean, obviously, we're in a really good position where we have a lot of talented players. But with the senior squad, there are only 8 players within it. So we've got a lot of players that are maybe just underneath that. And there was a gap from the national talent programme to the senior squad. So the establishment of a development squad has meant that those players that had made really good progress within the national talent programme had the opportunity to move up to the senior squad, but with that jump, having that sort of interim ground has meant that they can continue to grow and develop as individuals and as a collective, and also then have the opportunity to participate in competitions as well. So, for example, there has been and will be this season as well a couple of Quad Nations and Home Nations events whereby development squad players will be able to be put into that environment to give them the opportunity to represent England, and then to see how they cope within that competitive environment against players that they may not have ever played before, against nations they may not have ever played before, and almost use that as a development ground for them to then make that step up into the senior squad. And likewise, it gives players within the senior squad who may be less experienced, some of our younger players in the senior squad, like a Dan McClellan or a Tyler Reeve, that have gone through the programme. It means that they'll be able to potentially get additional exposure and experience at a high level as well. And it just helps to bridge the gap. And it also gives the senior squad potential opposition as well. So development squad players would regularly, in the build up to the World Cup, come to St George's Park and participate in fixtures. And we're, as I say, we're in a really good place whereby some of our development players are at a great level. If we didn't have such a depth of players, would potentially be senior squad players and wouldn't look out of place really. And also, if they were on a world stage, I think that if they were a World Cup and it was an England development squad or that type of squad, I think they would do really well at a World Cup level as well. Such is the talent that we have. So it's really helped to supplement the pyramid right at the top, and it's given players a proper ladder and a process to be able to move through to obviously ultimately go on and represent the seniors.
I think the introduction of it can't be understated. Whereas, as you mentioned, the England senior squad is only comprised of 8 players. Having that England development team underneath now means that the ambition and the dream of representing your country is so much more attainable, because for myself certainly, and I'm sure the players as well, representing and putting on that the 3 Lions England kit, whether that's England senior level or England development level, still means you're there representing your country. So they've almost doubled the opportunity for players to put on that shirt.
Absolutely. And also to add as well, obviously we talk about the programme as something where we're trying to identify players from a young age and move them through the programme. The development squad's also acted as a great opportunity for players that have maybe missed into the programme because of age. But if they've had a really strong National League season and they're making really good progress at a club level, then they can come into the development squad to be viewed and supported at that level as well. So the door is never closed when it comes to some of our older Powerchair players as well.
So going forward, obviously it's absolutely thriving at the moment, and I may be biased, but I feel it's probably one of the most comprehensive talent pathways in any form of sport, let alone football. Rob, do you have any sort of vision of how this program can evolve going forward? Have you got any thoughts or considerations that you want to implement to maybe improve the program or its visibility?
Sure. Well, something we want to try and do a little bit better across all our pathway really is make sure that our squads are fully representative of society, giving all communities, people from all backgrounds, a chance to realise their dream. And I think it's important that we look at how we can best do that. Players, that we realise how essential it is for players to have that support network. There's an awful lot of travelling involved in being an England player and being on the pathway. So it's important that we try and look at different ways that we can engage absolutely everyone to really maximise our talent pool. That's certainly one thing that myself and my colleagues in the talent team are looking at, how best we can do that. There's always going to be a conversation around at what level we support players in the RETP. So, for example, when a player does take the step to any TP, there is psychological support and physio support. It's not something we always offer at RETP, but it might be something we could consider in the future. And at the moment we've recently have expanded from 2 regions to 3. If we ever felt there was a need for additional coverage in a new geographical area of the country, that could well be something we discuss as well. But we're always looking for innovative ways to develop and grow the pathway. And there is a whole team of us, and Adam being a really integral voice in the discussions. It's probably worth handing over to you, Adam, without putting you on the spot, to see if there's any visions you have for the progression of our RETP.
Yeah, I think for me there's probably a couple of areas. So as the program has progressed and evolved, I think naturally we will begin to see a new cohort of players coming into the program. So I think by that we're probably going to see the overall average age of the players at RETP level probably decrease, which I think is great because it will give coaches a younger cohort to work with potentially for a prolonged period of time to really embed the key messages that we want to put to them. And coinciding with that, I think there's a bit of work for myself to lead on and working with Rob and the team around developing a bit more of a framework around what coaching looks like at this level. So being really clear as to some of the key things that we want coaches to be aware of and to potentially focus on. Because for us, yes, we're aware of the way that the England senior side look to play and their style of play, but at this level, coaching players to play in that style of play isn't a fundamental requirement. Working on their technical abilities and building their game understanding and decision making, that for me is key at this stage. And then we can use the NETP and the development squad levels to really work on their tactical understanding and that style of play. And then I think to add to the pool of coaches that we have, so we've got great coaches at the moment, and obviously Al's on the call. We've got Paul, and we've had Chris, Brad, and Dave have done some great work in the Midlands. But I think having some extra coaches potentially be available and interested to be able to support the program, I think is only going to benefit the players. It's going to challenge the existing coaches as well, and potentially it means that they'll be able to get together and to develop and bounce off each other as well. So being able to have a real impact not only on the court but also off the court as well, from both a playing and a coaching side, I think is the future for the RETP.
Yeah, I think on that point, we as the WFA probably have a responsibility in communicating the fact that RETPs are taking place, because we've had external coaches present before, but if we made a greater effort to ensure that their messages were relayed across our community, we would see a stronger presence of coaches, and the same can be applied for that that day at St George's Park, where the top performers come in to be assessed for NETP. And it's on that point I'd like for you, Adam, being so influential within the RETP and NETP, to explain the difference and how the RETP differs from the NETP in terms of its objectives, its structure, its opportunities, because sometimes the NETP can be held across multiple days. It introduces theoretical based situations. So can you just talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I think the NETP is that step up. So from our point of view of what we're looking at for players to progress, we're looking for the RETP to start to build and shape well-rounded players. So the basics of their technical abilities around their chair control and their technical skills of ball striking, and then also their understanding and their decision making, as I touched on, as well as we put up at the start, around showing signs of leadership and communication, having a good attitude, and that willingness to learn and develop. And through that, those are the key things that we look as characteristics to progress players through to the next stage at NETP level, where it is a more contact time. So there are weekend camps at Lilleshall where players come together and they're having 4, potentially 5 sessions on court, alongside, as Rob touched on, some of the psychological components, working on things such as dealing and how they cope in pressurized situations, goal setting, to build that side of their understanding and their progression towards wanting to be an elite level player, and also exposing them and putting them into a new environment. So coming together as a group with players they might know of them, but not necessarily too deeply, and making a new cohort of players, but also building friendship groups as well, because if you are part of the NETP, you're normally together for a minimum of 12 months. So you're coming together and you're building those relationships, because we want them to be able to obviously excel as players, but that also coincides with building those relationships off the pitch as well, to then see them go through the stages. So it's that step up in terms of the level of the expectation and the standard, and it's going back to what I said about being comfortably uncomfortable, putting them in a new environment and seeing how they cope. And for us as coaches, and for me coaching with at the NETP level, trying to again continue to support them on their journey, but also challenging them to really push themselves and see where they're at, and offering that feedback and support to them both on and off the pitch as well.
That's a really interesting kind of take on the differences there, particularly when you think about what an England player is going to experience the first time they go into a squad, and then maybe into a first international tournament. That new environment scenario, the new relationships, new challenges, and preparing them through that with experiences within the setting and within the context of being on the England pathway, I think is really important. And that being adaptable and doing that, just a thought pops in my head. I think I'm right in saying that England have never had a worse result in the knockout stages of a tournament against a team that they've played in the group stages of a tournament. So i.e. they play them in a group stage and they might do well, but they normally, I think they've only ever done better in the knockout stages. And knowing how they operate, that's about players understanding progression, communication, development of what they're doing within the tournament. And so being able to develop those skills and understand that that's what is needed to be an international player, and that's a part of your skill set you need to have, and that comes back to character and being able to communicate and talk and have a confidence in your own observations and analysis, and your ability to cope in new environments and thrive in those and see that pressure as an opportunity to perform. All of those things are basics from this and experiences that start being built from the RETP first session up to coming into that development squad and then stepping into that senior squad. All key personal characteristics and skills that you need to be a successful England player. So you can see that thread running through.
Absolutely.
Alex, sorry to interrupt there. Alex, it's important also just to mention here, unfortunately not every player in the RETP will make that ultimate step to represent their country at the senior level. So what we are also really keen on doing is not just developing really excellent football players, but also encouraging personal growth and making sure we're not just developing elite athletes, but we're actually also developing good human beings and those interpersonal skills. Your social activities in training sessions absolutely does that.
I probably promised you guys, and shouldn't overkill this at all, I'm going to nod back to our pending medium-term strategy as well. So I think the bit that you've just said there, Rob, really kind of resonates, because for me, again, a working title of this, but more than just football programme. That's something we will be implementing. We're not starting from ground zero on that. The reality is we've already started to put things in place, and we've taken responsibility to educate people in lots of different ways and grow them and help them develop and see things very differently. And that's as much around social skills, things that you mentioned around leadership, communications, those kind of things. But that's something we're really wedded to alongside the medium-term strategy. So hopefully those are things that are skills that you can take onto the court and onto the pitch, but actually they're also things that you leave people with as well, that they can deploy in all aspects of their life. So we're very, very certain that that's a direction that we want to go into more fully than even what we're doing right now.
Thank you, Dean, and thank you, Adam and Rob. I think we've had a very detailed, in-depth dive into the RETP, where it fits in the para talent pathway up to national squad, development squad, NETP, and it's been a really interesting discussion. It's great to see the threads running through all of those sections and the opportunities that players are given and exposed to. Both from a football point of view and as you said, Rob, as a human being's point of view as well. So thank you very much for joining us. It's been a great discussion. Any final thoughts from you?
No, really great insight, as you just mentioned. I think there's a lot of takeaways for people that are tuning in, whether you want to get onto the programme or even if you're currently on the programme. We've emphasised the fact that the 6 key capabilities, and we'll repeat them again: scanning, timing, movement, positioning, deception and technique, are such important factors of progression through the pathway. And Adam brilliantly broke them down and gave really good examples of how they're relevant to Powerchair football, and also that communication social piece and how we want people to come and ask questions and be inquisitive and communicate with new people, and the same thing that Adam said, being comfortable in uncomfortable situations. And if you can apply all kind of aspects like that, you're certain to go far within the programme.
Great stuff. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Dean. And thank you, Wright. We'll see you all again sometime soon.